She took advantage of the moment I got up to go to the bathroom. Simple as that. I turned away for 2 or 3 minutes, and when I returned, the party hall was the same, except for an absence that screamed so loudly that my heart understood before reason. She wasn't there anymore. Her glass was still on the counter, the chair pushed hastily, as if time had suddenly run out. I started walking among the guests with a strange tingling in my chest, a sharp intuition that grows, corrodes, almost whispers. My gaze scanned the room while my mind rejected the most obvious hypothesis. Was it just a cigarette? A breath? A phone call? What if something had happened? A fainting spell, dizziness, an unforeseen event. But as soon as I crossed the back corridor, where the exit to the garden was, the truth hit me like a blade. They were there. The two of them. Too close. Laughing softly. Their hands intertwined as if it were routine. She turned slowly when she heard my footsteps, and at that moment, it wasn't the kiss that destroyed me. It wasn't the touch, nor the complicity. It was the fear etched on her face. The terror of being caught, not remorse. The silence between us was deafening. I tried to understand that empty gaze, the frustrated attempt to stammer something that never came. I didn't need explanations. She hadn't lost her voice, she had lost her soul. I turned my back right there. I left behind more than one marriage, I left a part of myself that she killed with that carelessness. There were no screams, no scandal. What there was the end. A cold, dry, definitive end. In the days that followed, she tried to piece together the fragments with fragile words, with messages that began with, "I don't know what came over me," and ended with, "Do you still love me?" But with each attempt, the other's voice grew louder. He didn't want commitment. He didn't want a plan, or a future. And she, who had thrown everything away on a whim, was left with the bitter taste of a choice she couldn't even explain. I watched from afar, in silence, the spectacle of regret, like someone observing their own accident from the outside. She tried to find justifications where only impulse existed. She tried to remind me of the good times, as if a memory could erase the betrayal. But there was something she never understood: trust isn't broken by the act itself, but by the decision made before the act. By the moment someone consciously chooses another person knowing that you are at home believing them. She lost something valuable. I did too. But she lost knowing she destroyed it. And that weighs more. For me, time passed like a cruel teacher, teaching that love isn't enough, that giving without reciprocity is self-sabotage. I met someone else when I wasn't looking for anyone anymore. Someone who looked me in the eyes without looking away, who didn't calculate words, who didn't compare the present with the past. With her, I found peace. Not an explosive romance like in the movies, but a real, firm, silent connection. I didn't need games, tests, or surveillance. I just needed to be there. And for the first time in a long time, being there was enough. She reappeared. One day. Out of nowhere. As if the months hadn't left any marks. I was expecting something. A reunion. A second chance. A miracle, perhaps. But all I had to offer was what I still had left: forgiveness. And even that came out dry, because there was no anger anymore. And when there's no anger, there's no bond. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And she felt it. Her gaze fell like a child who's lost their favorite toy, but knows it was she herself who broke it. And there's no going back. Still, fate has a cruel sense of irony. She returned to that house where we lived together. And one day, perhaps on impulse, perhaps out of habit, she passed by the window. And there, in the same room where we danced on Sundays, where we sang off-key and drank cheap wine, she saw me dancing with another woman. The new woman. With the low light, bare feet, unrestrained laughter, a light embrace. The scene was simple. Intimate. Beautiful. And, above all, real. She stood outside for long seconds. looking inside as if she were looking at a parallel life that could have been hers. But it wasn't anymore. It wasn't. It never would be again. And it was there, outside that window, that she finally understood. That the love she lost wasn't by chance. It was by choice. That life doesn't forgive those who play with what is rare. That the heart is not a toy. That there are gestures that don't fade, words that don't return, silences that scream forever. She moved on with the memory of what she had and what she threw away. I moved on with the serenity of someone who survived a shipwreck and found solid ground. But what she saw in that room wasn't just a man moving on. It was living proof that everything she'd been searching for in other arms had been there all along. She just hadn't recognized it. Or cherished it. Or deserved it. What would she say to me if she could go back to that moment at the party? What would she choose if she'd had time to think before acting? Maybe I'll never know. But the truth is, some regrets don't apologize aloud. They just stay with you. Silently. In the mirror. On the pillow. In the emptiness. And the strangest thing, is that she looked at me through that window with teary eyes, and even then she couldn't knock on the door. Maybe because I knew that, after everything, it was no use anymore. But, what if she had knocked? What if I had opened the door? Perhaps this is the part of the story you don't yet know. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize betrayal. On the contrary, we condemn any form of disloyalty. The stories you're about to hear are fictional, but the feelings are real, and the message is clear. Betrayal destroys, hurts, and takes away what matters most. Prepare to feel firsthand the weight of wrong choices and the value of true love. Now take a deep breath, and hold on tight. You are about to hear a shocking story. Ryan and Emily met on an ordinary night, one of those nights that promises nothing but silently shapes destinies. It was a mutual friend's birthday, in a dimly lit bar with background music, where voices needed to get close to be heard and glances spoke louder than any introduction. She arrived with a lively group, laughing loudly, leaving a trail of presents behind her. He, more reserved, observed from afar, with the kind of attention that doesn't seek to impress, but that truly sees. A friend introduced them, without haste, and before they knew it, they had been talking for over an hour as if trying to make up for the time before they knew each other. The connection was almost silent. There was no euphoria, no promises, just a rare tranquility, a mutual recognition, as if the puzzle had finally found the missing piece. The first few months were calm. No games, no calculated disappearances, no messages left unread to test interest. Everything was direct, clear, and genuine. Ryan came from a discreet romantic history, with short relationships that never blossomed, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of a lack of depth. Emily, on the other hand, had scars that she masterfully hid. She had been loved superficially, criticized for being too much, then for being too little, until she learned to adjust her essence according to the other person's expectations. But with him, she didn't need to tone anything down. Ryan liked her layers, her sharp humor, the way she saw the world with sensitivity hidden in sarcasm. And she felt safe by his side, as if she could finally be whole, without fear of pushing him away. They lived in different neighborhoods and had opposite routines. She worked as an occupational therapist at a children's clinic. He was an architect at a small company that embraced social projects in his spare time. They had busy lives, complicated schedules, and distinct circles. And yet, they made it work. In the beginning, they met at night, shared simple meals, watched old series, and dozed off on the sofa before the last episode ended. Weekends were dedicated to discovering new cafes, small bookstores, and hidden trails. There was no ostentation, only desire. After a year together, they decided to live under the same roof. It was an easy choice, without major arguments. Ryan already had his own apartment, and naturally, Emily moved in, gradually occupying the spaces until she transformed the place into a home. She redecorated lightly, brought plants to the balcony, hung pictures with inspirational quotes, and organized his bookshelf by color, which he initially found absurd but later grew to like. The mornings became quiet and beautiful, with freshly brewed coffee and kisses before work. The nights were filled with long conversations and comfortable silence. They didn't need to be talking all the time. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was comforting. Over the years, their relationship took root. Families met, and friends came to see them as a role model for a balanced couple. They weren't perfect, they never pretended to be, but they knew how to listen to each other, respected each other's space, and, more than anything, there was mutual admiration. Emily admired Ryan's commitment to the social projects he volunteered for, as if he needed to balance the world he built with his own hands with the world he felt he needed to fix. Ryan, in turn, saw in her a quiet strength, the way she interacted with the children at the clinic, as if she broke a little with each one and rebuilt herself every time she saw a small progress. They were different people, but there was a rare kind of respect between them. They had plans, though not set in stone. They spoke naturally about marriage, but without a set date. They thought about having children, but knew it wasn't the right time yet. They lived with the comfortable certainty that time was on their side. Emily began to jot down little ideas for names, colors for the nursery, places where they would spend a quiet honeymoon, far from ostentation. Ryan sketched house plans on napkins when he thought about their future: a large balcony, a bright kitchen, an exposed brick wall. They dreamed together, even in silence. But, as in every story, time began to whisper other things. Small cracks that appear between gestures and that are not always noticed. Emily, who once overflowed with affection, began to carry a weariness in her eyes that Ryan couldn't name. And he, too absorbed in deadlines, meetings, and new proposals, started arriving later, quieter. Nothing glaring, nothing that justified concern. Just the subtle wear and tear of repetitions, of routines, of affection that settles. They began to lose each other without realizing it. When they realize it, they no longer share the same enthusiasm when talking about their day. Kisses became part of the routine. Their hands no longer sought each other on the sofa as before. They slept in the same room, but woke up at different emotional distances. And yet, there were no signs of a crisis. They continued to function as a couple, as a team. They organized the house, went out with friends, attended social events with discreet smiles and shared jokes. Love still existed, perhaps dormant, perhaps camouflaged by time. Emily continued to make coffee. Ryan still washed the dishes. They exchanged knowing glances at parties, laughed together at inside jokes, shared desserts. But, inside, something was slowly changing. Like an invisible crack in thick glass, it seems intact until one day it shatters. That's why, when they accepted the invitation to that end-of-year party, neither of them imagined that anything would go wrong. It was a typical celebration, the kind a friend couple throws, with a buffet, live music, and loved ones. They were both tired, but they went anyway. They arrived together, as always. Emily wore a navy blue dress that he loved, and Ryan wore a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, as she preferred. They exchanged discreet compliments before leaving home. In the car, they sang an old song that was playing on the radio and laughed when they got the lyrics wrong. It was an ordinary night. At the party, they greeted everyone warmly, chatted separately for a while, and then met again near the dessert table. She took 2 brigadeiros, Brazilian chocolate fudge balls, and put one directly in his mouth, saying, "You always say you don't want any, but you always eat mine." He laughed. He touched her waist lightly. There was affection. There was history. There was still love. Even if it was suffocated by layers of tiredness, routine, and unspoken silences. And it was there, at that party, in that seemingly trivial moment, that destiny began to draw new lines. Lines that don't always follow plans. Lines that bend, curve, collapse. Ryan, at some point, got up to go to the bathroom. It was quick. I didn't expect anything could change in minutes. Emily stayed there, near the bar, chatting with acquaintances. She was light, more smiling than usual, as if that night, for no apparent reason, made her breathe easier. It was just another night. It was just another party. It was just another moment among so many that seemed eternal. But not all moments are what they seem. And at that exact point, when everything was still possible, when destiny still offered options, none of the choices made could have predicted the impact they would have. No suspicious glance, no harsh word, no interpreted gesture could indicate what would come next. Because there are decisions that are not born the instant they are made, they are built in silence, little by little, in the sum of details that no one sees. And it was precisely in this silence that the story began to change. Ryan barely knew what had started at that party until the moment he returned from the bathroom. The music was still loud, the colorful lights still painted the hall, laughter and toasts filled the air with a rehearsed joy. But something was missing. Or rather, someone. He searched with his eyes among the groups of friends, at the nearby tables, next to the bar, but Emily wasn't there. At first, the absence seemed casual, perhaps she was in the women's restroom or in some more secluded conversation. However, as the minutes passed, a silent discomfort grew within him, like a cold breeze anticipating a storm. He picked up his cell phone, typed a quick message, something light, almost a joke, missed the dance floor. And stared at the screen as if she could answer telepathically. No notification. No reaction. Not even the 3 dots indicating that she was typing. Driven by an instinct he couldn't yet name, he began to walk. He wasn't looking for an answer. He was looking for relief, for a silent denial of what he was beginning to suspect. When he crossed the hallway leading to the back garden, the answer came before his feet even reached it. They were there. She and he. A stranger, but one who smiled with the intimacy of someone who already knew what he was doing. Emily's gaze was divided between surprise and guilt. She hadn't expected to be seen. Neither had he. For a moment, no one said anything. But the silence was louder than any scream. Ryan simply turned his back and returned to the hall. And with that simple gesture, he ended what he still insisted on calling a wedding. In the days that followed, she tried to explain herself. She sent long, confused messages, interspersed with apologies and justifications that didn't hold up. He said it was a mistake, an impulse, that he didn't know what he was doing. But it wasn't the betrayal itself that destroyed everything, it was the coldness of the moment, the lightness with which she seemed to have crossed a line that could never be erased. The lover. He disappeared soon after learning that there would be no commitment, that it wasn't a hidden relationship, but a marriage of many years. Emily was left with the silence, the shame, the remnants of what she had destroyed. Time passed. Ryan rebuilt himself in silence. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Months later, he met someone else, someone who offered him peace, transparency, presence. It wasn't a story driven by intense passion, but by complicity. The woman who came into his life didn't ask to heal wounds, she simply respected their healing time. And that was enough. Things took shape, the days became light again, and, for the first time in a long time, he smiled with his eyes once more. And then, one ordinary afternoon, it happened. Emily walked past their old house. An almost involuntary act, like revisiting the past only to confirm that it's truly over. She stopped across the street and looked out the window, unsure of exactly what she was looking for. And what she saw pierced her like a blade. Ryan was dancing with another woman. The light from the room bathed them both in a soft warmth. They were barefoot, their bodies pressed together in a slow rhythm, their eyes closed. She laughed at something he said, and he pulled her closer. Emily stood motionless. That simple scene hurt more than any argument, more than any words. It was there, in that moment, that she finally understood what she had lost. It wasn't just a husband. It was a home. It was a future. It was a love that, despite all the wear and tear, still pulsed within her until she crushed it with a rash choice. Emily didn't have the courage to knock on the door. She simply turned her back and returned to her car with the feeling of observing a life that should have been hers. In the following days, she tried to convince herself that it was just another reflection of regret. But the regret didn't dissipate. It grew. It took shape. And then, without her seeking it, the past knocked on the door in another form. A mutual friend, someone who had lost contact with both of them since the breakup, contacted Emily, saying she had found a box with old things from the time they all lived together. Photographs, notes, unsent letters. Emily agreed to meet her friend. She needed, somehow, to reconnect with that version of herself who still believed in what she had with Ryan. During the meeting, amidst painful memories and nostalgic smiles, the friend casually mentioned an episode Emily was previously unaware of. One night, months before the betrayal, Ryan had asked this friend for advice. He was insecure, distressed, thinking Emily no longer loved him. He was planning a surprise, a dinner, a trip, perhaps an official marriage proposal. He had bought a ring. He kept it at the bottom of his office drawer, waiting for the right moment. He wanted to start over with her. To relive what they had lost in their routine. Emily froze. She never knew about this. She never saw the ring. She never knew about the plan. Her stomach churned as if time were violently rewinding to throw everything she had ignored in her face. While she flirted with doubt, Ryan flirted with hope. While she chose an impulse, he chose to stay. And all he wanted was to continue with her. That night, Emily went to the car and cried like she hadn't in a long time. It wasn't a cry of longing. It was a deep lament for everything she hadn't seen, for everything she hadn't known how to value. She remembered the nights he arrived late and still asked if she needed anything. The days he left notes around the house, even when she no longer responded with the same enthusiasm. She remembered his patience. His calmness. The way he looked at her, even when she had stopped looking back. The next day, in an almost desperate impulse, he returned to that house. He parked the car in the same spot as before and waited. He wasn't sure what he wanted. Maybe to see him one more time. Maybe just to feel that he could still do something. When he finally came out, hand in hand with his new companion, she got out of the car. Ryan saw her. He stopped. The silence between them returned like an ancient shadow. She took a deep breath and simply said that she needed to talk. He hesitated, but agreed. They went to a nearby cafe. They sat across from each other like two strangers sharing a past. Emily spoke. She said everything. That she had no more excuses. That she knew what she had lost. That the scene at the window had shown her how much he had moved on. And yet, she needed to say that she still loved him. That if there was a corner, a piece of space inside him, she wanted to occupy it again. Ryan listened without interrupting. His eyes weren't cold. They were serene. When she finished, he calmly held the cup and said that, for a long time, he had dreamed of that moment. That, for nights, he had waited for her to appear with that speech. But that now it was too late. The wound had healed. And the love she asked for back had already been given to someone else. Not out of revenge. But out of merit. Emily tried to smile. But she failed. A tear fell without her trying to stop it. He stood up, paid the bill, and before leaving, said there was no anger. That forgiveness had already been given. But that some losses are final. And that sometimes the pain of a wrong choice is all that remains when you don't recognize what you have. She stayed there, alone. And she understood that the true punishment for betrayal is not guilt. It's the awareness of what was thrown away. Of what will never return. Of the love she could have lived, and that now dances with another, behind a window where she will never again be welcome. That night, after their conversation at the cafe, Ryan returned home in silence. The city was still alive outside, but inside, everything was at peace. It wasn't the empty peace that comes from indifference, nor the kind that springs from the pride of having won. It was a different kind of peace, a mature peace, born when the soul understands that it did everything it could, that it felt until the end, and that, despite the pain, it chose to continue. As he drove back, he remembered so many versions of himself, the passionate man, the devoted husband, the betrayed one, the devastated one, the silent one. And now, the free man. Not free from memories, but free from the invisible shackles that bound him to a past that no longer made sense. He arrived home, opened the door, and there she was, the woman who had arrived after everything, with a calm smile, gentle eyes, and a hug that never asked for explanations. She didn't ask how it was. She simply hugged him. And in that hug, Ryan realized that love, when it's real, doesn't demand promises. It simply remains. In the following months, life took its own course. Ryan and his new partner moved to a larger, more secluded house with a spacious garden and enormous windows, just as he had always dreamed. Gradually, he began to revisit old projects, enthusiastically returned to drawing, and planned a small exhibition of his own artwork. On weekends, he hosted friends for long dinners filled with laughter and light conversation. The presence of his new woman in his life brought not only love but also relief. It was a love without haste, without demands, a love that wasn't afraid of the past and didn't need to compete with memories. She loved who he was now, with all the marks he carried in his eyes, with all the stories that had shaped him. And so, slowly, he rebuilt himself, not as someone who forgets, but as someone who understands that some wounds, even healed, remain a part of the skin. On the other side of the story, Emily continued trying to understand at what point she lost her way. In the first few months, she still believed that time would soften the blow, that perhaps a reconciliation would be possible, that all it took was the right moment, the right conversation, the right gesture. But time didn't embrace her as she expected. It was relentless, showing her the weight of the consequences each day. She distanced herself from old friends, many of whom began to avoid her not out of judgment, but out of discomfort. It was difficult for them to look her in the eye without remembering everything that had happened. At the clinic where she worked, the sparkle that used to accompany her dedication to her patients began to fade. She arrived quietly, left silently. The enthusiasm that once filled her days was replaced by an apathy that was not easily explained. It was as if everything she did lost its color. Some nights she drove aimlessly, passing places where she had been happy with Ryan. The corner coffee shop where they shared laughs on rainy Sundays, the square where he taught her to ride a bike with the larger wheels, the small bookstore where they chose together the book they would read aloud during a trip. Every corner of the city was a memory. And none of them offered solace. On the contrary, they were all reminders of what she had thrown away with a thoughtless decision. Regret became a constant presence, a ghost that followed her in the hallways, in the elevators, in the mirror. She tried to move on, met other people, made dates, but nothing was more than a frustrated attempt to find pieces of a love that would never return. The loneliness she felt wasn't due to a lack of companionship, but a lack of meaning. She didn't want a new love. She wanted her old love back. But the old love was already new in other arms. It had already blossomed in other soil. It already had another story. Then, one day, she received a call from an old acquaintance. A mutual friend was getting married. The invitation arrived in the mail days later. She hesitated to open it. She hesitated to go. But she ended up deciding to attend. Perhaps to breathe different air. Perhaps just to pretend she had moved on. The hall was elegant, simply decorated. When she arrived, she saw familiar faces, shy smiles, some restrained greetings. And, minutes later, she saw Ryan entering hand in hand with his partner. The two smiling, calm, in harmony. They weren't engaged. They weren't married. But they were complete. He didn't see her. And even if he did, perhaps he wouldn't recognize the woman she had become. Emily sat in a discreet corner, drank something light, feigned lightness. But inside, everything hurt. The music started, the guests stood up to dance. And then she saw it. Ryan dancing with the same lightness with which he used to dance with her. But now with someone else. The scene was almost identical to the one she had seen through the window months before, but now under the lights of an illuminated hall, with applause all around. It was like watching her own past being reenacted with a new cast. And there was nothing she could do. There was no longer a role for her in that play. She left before the end of the party. She walked to the car with short steps. When she sat in the driver's seat, she didn't cry. She just remained silent, staring at the steering wheel. It was there that she understood that the pain of losing someone who loved you is not their absence in your life, it's their presence, happy in another. Over the years, Ryan and his partner built a new family. Not perfect, but real. With mistakes, lessons learned, and growth. They had a daughter, who inherited her father's easy laughter and her mother's quiet sweetness. He didn't forget Emily. But he didn't hold a grudge either. She only kept the memory of the man who was by her side. And, in a way, she was even grateful, because, in losing what she thought was the end of the road, she ended up finding a true new beginning. Emily went on living, but she never loved the same way again. Not as punishment, but out of conscience. She discovered, too late, that love isn't something you find every day. That there are people who cross our paths and offer us everything, trust, loyalty, presence, and that, if we don't recognize it, time takes its toll. And when it does, it doesn't negotiate. If you've made it this far, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments, what touched you the most, if you've ever seen something similar happen, or if you've ever experienced something like this. This exchange is important, here, all stories count. And if this story moved you, made you reflect, subscribe to the channel now, because every week you'll find stories here that touch, warn, and transform. This story teaches us, with pain and beauty, that betrayal doesn't end when the act is committed, it continues, silently, in gestures that are never repeated, in glances that no longer meet, in words that lose their value. To betray is not just to hurt the other. It is to destroy something sacred, trust, admiration, home. And when that is broken, however much forgiveness there may be, there is not always a return. Remember, this channel does not support and will never support any kind of betrayal. Here, we tell fictional stories that show how costly thoughtless decisions can be. Because love is commitment, and betrayal is tearing that commitment apart with your own hands. Until the next story.